but otherwise I'll try and keep an eye on that. Okay, we are on this Mishnah. We've just actually remember we were talking about sending out the messengers, but more than that, we're focusing on the Mishnah, which you've got. Let's just pick this up again. If you remember, well, you don't have to. I don't know what happened. I seem to have lost you all, but now back again. Sorry about that. Apologies. Let's try it. Good. We got Mr. Reinhold with us. Good to see you. Right, we're picking this up on Chov Gimel Amud Aleph. I see I've come off video. Hopefully this will be better for us. Chov Gimel Amud Aleph, right at the bottom. If you remember, they lit these bonfires. And you remember the bonfires went from place to place, starting at Har HaZeisim, Mount of Olives. Remember we said that on that Mishnah in Chov Beis on the base. We spoke about how they lit, and we particularly were focusing on where the places were. If you remember, they started from Har HaMishcha, and then they went to various places. Saratava. Remember all these bonfires, trying to get the message out without the use of text. They were sending the message out. And remember, it starts in Har HaMishcha, which is Har HaZeisim. I'll just remind of the Mishnah, to a place called Saratava, and then from Grufino to Havron, and then Base Built-In. Base Built-In sounds like a house of built-in, but we'll come to that in a minute. And if you remember, from there they lit, and it looks like the distance covered right across. It says remember they were waving the fire until they could see the whole of the Goyla, seeing it was a light lit up on fire. Let's have a look here at the last line of Chov Gimel Amud Aleph. And remember it says, Mi'ayin hoyu masiyin maso. It's the very last line. Where did they light these bonfires? And it says, V'chulu. It goes through those four places. And if you remember, the fifth one was Base Built-In. Now, useful for the Gemara, perhaps not so much for us. My base built-in. What does it mean, the house of built-in? What is this base built-in? Remember, this is the fifth place that they are lighting the bonfire. So it's going from mountain to mountain. And this last one, my base built-in, look, the last line of the Gemara, Omar Rav. Rav said, as we turn the page, we're now on Chov Gimel on the base, Zu Biram, a place called Biram. And then if you remember from there, they were lighting up to the whole of the Goyla, my Goyla. What does it mean in the Goyla? Normally talk about the diaspora, but where, of course, the Goyla we were talking about here is where the main Jewish population was. That's in Bovel. Where in particular in Goyla? I mean, Goyla is a big place. Omar Rav Yosef Zu Pumpadisa. What we're talking there is particularly Pumpadisa. That is considered the main place of where the Jewish people were living, the settlements there. Interesting, not Nahadia, Pumpadisa. In fact, there were various places where they were at the time of the Gemara. When we're talking about the time of Rav Yosef, the main place was Pumpadisa, and that's really, it went from yeshiva to yeshiva, but Pumpadisa, we normally talk about Surah and Pumpadisa, the main place was Pumpadisa. Says the Gemara, what does it mean, my? And they could look out from this fifth place, which was base built-in, and they saw Kimedura Soesh, like a real bonfire in the distance in Pumpadisa. How did that happen, that it looked like the whole place was on fire? Says the Gemara, Tana kol echod v'echod notel avuka biyodai, third line down, v'oile l'roish gagai. What people would do in Pumpadisa, good to see you, Sam. In Pumpadisa, what they would do is everyone would go on top of their roof And from the top of the roof, they would be not just waving, they would be lighting their bonfires. So from the distance, from base built in, remember this was the fifth stop, the fifth mountain, starting from Har HaZeisim going out towards to Bovel, to Disa. The fifth stop was base built in, and from there it went and they saw the whole of Pumbedisa alight. Why was that? Because I say everybody went on the top of their roof. Hopefully no hazard there, no fire hazard, but everybody on top of the roof lighting the bonfire, and therefore it really looked like the whole of Pumbedisa was alight, and that was the signal, the sign they were showing that they'd got the message, and therefore they knew. Remember, this was always the night after the announcement of the Rosh Chodesh, so people would know exactly when Rosh Chodesh was. And in particular, remember originally that was on Rosh Hashanah as well. When remember in those days we spoke about this before. If Rosh Hashanah was that one day, they could light the following night, and people would then know that that day was Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, the following day is no longer Rosh Hashanah. It's not a 2-day Rosh Hashanah. They would have known that the first day was Rosh Hashanah, and the second day, therefore, is not Rosh Hashanah, but just would be the second day of that month, if it would be Tishri, and similarly for other months too. Says the Gemara, third line down. Tanya Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer. So some people change, Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer. I've got it 4 lines down. Af Chorim 1. These are all different mountains, as we'll see. Also on Chorim, a place called Chorim, or Kayor, another place, Geder, and Chevroi Seha. Around it, when you talk about Chevra, it means around the settlements around that area. That they were also places where there were bonfires. Says the Gemara, that's a brisa that seems to contradict what we learned in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, remember, had that list starting with Har HaZeisim and going beyond, and we had base built in, for example, which was number 5. Here we seem to have a different list of mountains. Says the Gemara, Ikeda Amre. There are those that say, in other words, we'll find a machlokas, Beini Uveini Havakaima. Have a look at Rashi, please. Top line. Avchorim, Bekayo, Begeder, all these other places. V'chevroi sehov. Actually, it says in our Gemara, Hoyu Masin Masois. Yeah, that's where they would also light their bonfires. Baroshe Horim Shelahem. At the top of their mountains, they would be lighting as well. That seems to be in contradiction to our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Ikeda Amre, there are those that say, 5 lines down, Beini Uveini Hamakaima. They were between the mountains mentioned in our Mishnah. No contradiction. Have a look at Rashi. Beini Uveini Tahanach de Masnisin. Between the ones mentioned in our Mishnah, Havakaimin Hanach. Those others were available and applicable, and people would be lighting. So in other words, there were like a half a stop, if you like, between those mountains, where there would be further mountains be on the top of further mountains, so that that message could move along. That's one way of learning this brisa. Says the Gemara, Ikeda Amre, there are others that say, very interesting, Lahach Gisa the Eretz Yisrael Havakaima. What's it mean, Lahach Gisa? The other sounds like the other Gisa is like a side. In other words, imagine you've got 2 roads going out towards Pumbedisa, and they go in 2 different ways. So in other words, you've got, interesting, we're not going straight then. That's very interesting. We're following the path of the mountains, because obviously you just don't want as the crow flies. You want to find places where there are these high mountains. And those mountains looks like they're taking 2 different routes to be able to get to Pumbedisa. So it's Lahach Gisa, the other side of Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? Havakaima. Ma choshev dahai gisa. One, which is our Mishnah, follows one particular route to be able to get to Bovel. Uma choshev dahai gisa. Have a look at Rashi. Be'idach gisa, on the other side. What do you mean the other side? Shel Eretz Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael, Litzad Bovel, towards Bovel, Shnei Tzedodim Shel Eretz Yisrael. Two ways, two directions, Nimshachim Litzad Bovel, would go towards Bovel. You can have particular routes if you're following these mountains. So either these mountains are between, interesting, we don't seem to know exactly where these mountains are in this brisa. Some say they were mountains, as I say, between the main mountains mentioned in our Mishnah, and others say, no, it was a different route that they were following to ensure that everybody in Bovel knew about the new Chodesh. They would take two different routes. The mountains, you had people positioned on top of these different mountains. They would be looking out at the mountain towards Eretz Yisrael. They'd be lighting a bonfire, and so it would go on. Okay? Ma choshev dahai gisa, beginning of the line. Uma choshev dahai gisa. Okay. What about distances we're talking about here? Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Bein kol achas va'achas. Between each one of these mountains, going back, let's say, to our Mishnah, there were shmoina parsois. Have a look at Rashi. Bein kol achas v'achas tahanach, that are mentioned de masnisin of our Mishnah. So we're focusing on the ones mentioned in our Mishnah, starting at Harazetim, at Harazesim, and going out towards Bovel in that direction. Between each of these mountains was 8 parsois. Now, people may be familiar with the Loshen parasol. Parasol is normally, it is Dalad mil. Those people who've got the calculations right. Dalad mil. And what is a mil? A mil, not a mile. A mil is 2,000.
Give it a look, yeah. Let me just search it. Have I lost the sound? No, because it's only going on the thing, won't it? I'll give it a look.
Mervyn, we've all lost the sound, Mervyn.
Okay.
But you've put your hand up, Mervyn, and we can see your.
I had a question.
So Norman, hopefully will come back.
I'm just going to send this to Yehuda. Join in as well. 1 second.
Got you back again. What happened? I seem to have lost you. I do apologise.
Yehuda Khan is just linking in. Is he allowed to join, please?
Yeah, why not? I don't know how he has to follow that. We're talking here about the Dalet parasol, if you remember.
Yeah.
So we've got these. I'm not the host here, so I don't know who's hosting. So we'll have to allow people in.
Just copy that thing.
You copy and send it to me. Just make
Okay, so we're talking here about the Dalet parasol. Best of everybody to go on mute, unless you want to say something. If you can.
Marvin, put yourself on mute.
If you can go on mute, unless you want to say something.
I had a question. I just asked you a technical question. You said there were 5 mountains between Eretz Yisrael and Bovel.
No. They used 5 mountains for the bonfires. There are probably many more mountains.
It was a huge distance. That was enough to light the whole. How are you?
Right, can you hear me?
Yeah, very.
Yes.
Finally, I don't know. There seems to be different things going on here. Right, let's move along. So we were talking about these Dalet Pasois. You're quite right. There is a big distance, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But at the moment, we're talking about the distance between the mountains was Dalet Pasois. Okay? The Dalet Pasois, these 4 Pasois. Now, remember, we spoke about this before. A parsa is 4 mil. If everyone's got to just work this out in their head. A mil is 2,000 amos. Okay? An amma is, if you talk about 2,000 amos, it's about half a meter. So if you're talking about one parcel, people got the sums here that are arithmetic. One parcel would be 4 mil. A mil is 2,000 amos. So a parseh is 8,000 amos. Okay? Again, the distance between the mountains, the Gemara said here, is shmoina parsois, 8 parsois. Again, a parso is 8,000 amos. Approximately, people say something like 3 miles. So about maybe 2.5 to 3 miles would be your parso. There are 8 of those between the mountains. So about 25 miles between these mountains. Okay? Now, how many of them are there? Give us a bit of a distance here. Shmoina parsois. Let's read this again. Kol achas. Beginning line is achas. Between each one was shmoina parsois. About 25 miles, a bit, maybe a bit less. Okay, so how many were there in total? We said there were 5 mountains. In other words, the space between them, in other words, 4 spaces of 8 parsah. You with me? There's 8 parsah between each mountain. About, as I say, 24 miles, let's say. And there are, remember, 5 mountains or 4 spaces between them. Not very difficult to calculate. So 4 of those, yeah? So we got 8 parsah between each mountain, 24. 24 times 4 gives you 96, around 100 miles or so. Yeah? So in total, Kama Havalahu, says the Gemara, Talosin Bataratin, 32 parsah. Is that right? 8 fours, go back to the old sums. 8 fours, 32. There we are, we got the 32 times about 3 miles, let's say. So it's around the 100-mile mark. Says the Gemara, and this is the point that perhaps Mervin's making, for Ho'idna Tuvahava. In fact, the actual routes, if people are traveling between these mountains or getting from there to base, it's only till base built in. Remember, that's the last stop for the bonfires. Before you get from there directly, presumably very high, you get from there directly to Pumpadisa. Okay? Says the Gemara, how can you tell me this is only, as we said, 32 parsah, around your 100-mile mark, between the Har HaZeisim, and imagine you're traveling from Har HaZeisim, travelers going from Har HaZeisim out to this base built in, which is where the last fire is, the last bonfire. Says the Gemara, it's much more than that. How can you tell me it's only this 100 miles? And we know if you're traveling a lot further than that. Omar Abaya says, Istatumi istatum, Luhu darche. What does that mean? Istat from the word sosum. Have a look at Rashi. Sosum, dorochi, which means the roads have been, as Rashi says, istotum dorochai, v'ochsu ha'holchin derech akalosoin. Can you see the Rashi there, 4th line down? What's it mean, istotum dorochai? They've become closed. The ways have been closed. That's the point. In other words, it would be great to be able to travel from mountain to mountain, but you can't because the roads have been closed. And therefore, what used to happen, we're saying here, certainly the time of Abaya, and therefore we're saying the roads were, closed, and therefore with these obstructions, what they would have to do, and you have to do, as Rashi says here, akalosoin. You're turning round. In other words, the word road doesn't go straight anymore. In the olden days, that's what we're talking here in the Gemara, where the Gemara says that it was only this 100-mile, the roads used to go from one to the other directly. But nowadays, people traveling would travel a lot longer, a lot further, because the roads now are, as we've said here, they've been closed in the time of the Golus by external source. They've been closing down these roads, not enabling people to travel directly from one mountain to the other. And to look at the very interesting how the Gemara continues here. We got a posuk. Lochein, you may have it around the side of your Gemara. And if you do have this Gemara, it comes from Hosea. Lochein, therefore, this is the posuk. Hineni soch. You read that soch. Es darkeich basirin. This is a nevuah going into the future, saying what will happen. Your roads, hineni soch. This word soch, people familiar with soch, it means there will be, there are other Rashis on this, which means there'll be seguro, closed. The roads will be closed. With actually the word sirim means thorns. There will be thorns preventing straightforward travel. So what this Novi is telling us, that coming up into the future, there will, sadly, you will not be able to travel directly anymore. There will be roadblocks with the Romans or whoever is in control, and therefore people would not be traveling directly any longer. And this nevuah, that's what Abba is telling us. The nevuah, actually, here we have it, that we would have expected the distance to be that much shorter, but sadly people are traveling now in a more convoluted way, akalosoin, as Rashi tells us. Or there's another pasuk also telling us sadly what will happen in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara Rav Nachman Yitzchak, the last line before we get to the next Mishnah, Oma Mehocha. He's got another pasuk to tell us that the roads will be blocked, and therefore people traveling from one area to another will have to travel on, a derech akalosoin, a veering across rather than going directly. And another pasuk, where's this pasuk taken from? This pasuk, we've got another pasuk. This pasuk is actually from Eicha, where the pasuk tells us there, Nesivoi sai ivo. Nesivoi sai ivo means Nesivoi sai means my roads, ivo have been twisted. My roads have been twisted around, sadly, in the time of Golus, trying to escape from those people, never the Romans or whoever we're talking about in that posuk in Eicha, into the future, going into Golus, you will sadly not be able to travel directly, and that's really what we're seeing here. That the although you would have expected the distances between those mountains as mentioned here, this 100-mile point, actually, if you were traveling there, you were going in, in a more convoluted way, and therefore it was indirect, and therefore, of course, much further. So, yes, we've got these mountains spaced out, and then from there going to Golus, we've got this last mountain, which would then go out to Bovel. So you're quite right. You've got just these few mountains. According to one view, don't forget there were other mountains in between too, but these were the main mountains taking us right out to Beis Biltin, and from there they will go out to Pumbedisa, which was the main area where the Jewish population was, and they will be lighting their own, going up onto the roof to light their bonfires there, so it would look like the whole of Pumbedisa was ablaze with this light. And with that, we finish that Mishnah, which tells us about the bonfires, how they would tell everybody that in fact it was Rosh Chodesh. We move on to the next Mishnah. And the next Mishnah
So just one point, Norman. Are you
Yes.
saying up to base Baltin are the 8? Are the
Base Baltin, yeah, that was the 5th mountain. The
And how
5th
far-
known mountain.
How far is that from Bovel? How far is that from Pompediso?
That it doesn't mention. It's interesting. It sounded like pretty clear that from base Biltin out to Bovel, that was like the last post. But what we've got is these mountains spread out right across, getting up to base Biltin, and from base Biltin you didn't need to go any further because it looks like base Biltin, the visibility from base Biltin up to Bovel was sufficient. So interesting, no mention about that distance here. It's only telling us the distance where people had to do these actions of lighting these bonfires and telling us the distance between those mountains. There's no mention because I suppose we just don't need to know that. But here we're positioning where the bonfires that people have to light. And so we've got those distances. We don't have the distance from that last one out to Bovel. But obviously it's quite some distance.
The distance from Bovel to Palestine, as it then was, I don't know how many, several 100,000 miles. How long is it? How big? It took 6 weeks to go from Bovel to Israel by foot. I mean, it wasn't. Around the corner.
On the way, I mean, the way we've explained it here, that the route is a lot. I think it wasn't like the crow flies. The distances we've been giving here are more, as I say, straight crow flies, but we've said the actual route that the travelers would have been taken, and that's exactly what the Gemara says. The route was a lot longer than that, and that's exactly the point the Gemara is making, that the route you take would not be as the crow flies, it would be diverted all around the place, and therefore much longer than the distances here. We're just telling us where the position of the mountains were, but to be able to get there was actually a lot longer because of, say, the distance you'd be traveling around rather than going directly. And that leads us to, we're now focusing on what would happen and when the Eidim would come to Yerushalayim. And we're moving from, okay, this is, although interesting, it's in some way reversed because we've said about lighting the bonfires, but okay, that's crucial because that tells us when the actual Rosh Chodesh was. But now we're going into more detail. So again, the first Mishnah told us the Eidim coming, they had to be recognized. Remember, they would have some type of pass to explain who they were. Otherwise, Eidim would come with them. The next Mishnah tells us where they lit the bonfire. But what about the actual process of examining the Eidim? That's what we've got now. The next few Mishnayos tells us this point. And on we go with the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Chotzer Gedoyla Hoysa Birushalayim. There was this very large chotzer, like a courtyard, in Yerushalayim, ubeis Yazek Hoysa Nikres, called Beis Yazek. Okay. And what was special about that? Ulashom Kolo Eidim Miskansim. That's where all the Eidim would come. They would not so much meet, but that's where they would gather at that place. Ubeisdin Boidkim Oisom Shom. And that's where, have you got it? The Mishnah, and that's where the Bezdin would examine these Eidim to make sure they were actually not so much telling the truth, but they hadn't been confused maybe by sightings. Okay, in particular, look at Rashi. Says Rashi, Chotzer Gedoyla Hoysa B'Yerushalayim, and all the Eidim Miskansim, says Rashi, B'Yom HaShabbos. That was the place they met on Shabbos. Shechileluhu Lovoi Ulahoid. They're desecrating the Shabbos, and don't forget we had a pasuk to tell me that this was permitted. they were allowed to desecrate the Shabbos, to be Mechalel Shabbos. Where would they meet? Others say they would always meet here, but in particular, we're focusing on the Shabbos aspect, because there are going to be problems about meeting on Shabbos. Yes, they were allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos, and yes, they were allowed to travel any distance and by any means to be able, of course, there's one proviso. So again, imagine they saw the moon on Friday night, they'd have to calculate, can we get to Yerushalayim by the end of Shabbos? Because we want to get there in other words, sometime before the end of Shabbos, with the possibility of the Beis Din examining the witnesses and announcing that that day is Rosh Chodesh. Because if they're too far away to be able to get that because of that distance, there's no point being Mechalel Shabbos. Yeah? So the main point was we want to try and get the Eidim to Yerushalayim by the end of Shabbos. They saw the new moon on Friday night, and that's exactly what Rashi says here. B'yom Shabbos shechileluhu lova lahoid. They've been Mechalel Shabbos, desecrated the Shabbos, and they're allowed to. We found psukim about that previously. You're allowed to break Shabbos. Where would they meet? They would meet in this big courtyard. Ubeis Yazik Hoysonikres. Remember, it was called Beis Yazek, beginning of the line. Ulashom kol ho'edim miskansim ubezdin boyutkim oisom shom. Now, beautiful, the next piece. This is where Mr. Reich comes in, or I suppose now it's Itzik, is it, or whoever your caterers are. Says the Mishnah, Usu'udois gedolos, beginning of the line, oisim lohem, they would make a wonderful party, a huge affair. This is Shabbos. Of course, you've got to have your Suda Shabbos anyway, but beside that, they wanted to make this big party, bishvil sheyuhu regilin lovai. So that a bit of an incentive, a wonderful slap-up meal, huge catered affair, so that people would be keen to come. They wouldn't feel they're losing out. There would be a huge meal laid on for them. Okay, that's very nice. Continues the Mishnah. Bori Shoina, originally, beginning of the line, Lo hoyu zozim, got it? Bori Shoina, middle of the line of the Mishnah, on Chov Gimel Amud Beis. Bori Shoina, originally, Lo hoyu zozim misham. They wouldn't move from there, kol hayoy, all day. Why not? Says the Rashi, Lo hoyu zozim misham, lefi sheyotzu chutz l'tchum. Many of these people would have come from outside the Tchum. Remember, you've got 2,000 Amos from outside Yerushalayim that you'd be coming into. A person not allowed to even walk 2,000 Amos from outside any place. You've only got 2,000 Amos. From outside a city, someone's dwelling in a city, you've got 2,000 Amos out of that. So, these people have broken Shabbos. They may have well gone more than 2,000 Amos, not that far, 2,000 Amos, about a kilometer outside where they were living, and they're allowed to break the Shabbos and do that, to be able to get to Yerushalayim. Not only go through the Tchum, they'd be allowed to break Shabbos by taking a wagon or whatever vehicle they wanted to be able to get to Yerushalayim, but in particular, they've traveled more than 2,000 Amos. Now, the rule is, if somebody travels more than 2,000 Amos, and in this case it was permitted, and now look at the Rashi, Hayotzi chutz l'tchum ein loy ela daled Amos. He is only allowed his daled Amos, 4 cubits, but it means if a person gets to, for example, a chotzer, that whole chotzer is considered, the courtyard is considered his daled Amos. You cannot travel any further. You cannot go any further. Normally, you'd have 2,000 Amos from wherever you are. but not in this instance. If a person has broken Shabbos and traveled more than 2,000 amas, then they are only allowed that area where they are, their daled amas, or if they're actually in a house or in a courtyard, that courtyard, and no further. And that's what they did originally, because that's the general rule. Someone who has broken Shabbos as far as going through this 2,000 amma barrier, you'd only be allowed to stay in that one place. So again, Boris Shoina originally, Lo hoyu zozin mishom kol hayoim. They did not. Zoz means to move. That's the word zuzim. Zuzim means money, of course, zuz, because as we know, it moves from place to place, from person to person, the ups and downs of the markets and investments too. So the word, that's word zuz, come from zoz. La zuz, you'd still use today in the Brit. Lo hoyo zozim mishom kol hayom. They would not leave there all day. However, Hiskin Rabbi Gamliel Hazokin, Rabbi Gamliel the elder, because there are two Rabbi Gamliels, and Rabbi Gamliel Hazokin, the grandson, also called Rabbi Gamliel. This is the Rabbi Gamliel Hazokin. Shehu Mahalchin Alpayim Amon L'chol Ruach. There's a new rule here. We said that anybody who's broken through the 2,000 Amma barrier has to stay where they are, or within that, they're confined to that courtyard, to that house. They cannot go any further. Normally, someone who lives in a particular vicinity is allowed 2,000 ammas in any direction, right? That's fine. If you're at home, you can go in any direction 2,000 ammas. However, if you've broken through the 2,000 amma barrier, shouldn't have done that, but you did, you have to stay within your daled amas, 4 cubits, or actually your area, a courtyard, wherever you're staying.
Where is this 4 amas, Norman? Is it as soon as you've gone over the 2,000?
Once you've gone beyond your 2,000 amas, unless you've actually hit a house or a courtyard.
So these witnesses, they may have gone over the 2,000 amas some distance from Yerushalayim.
Absolutely.
They may have done it some distance from Yerushalayim.
Absolutely.
So they have to stay in this place outside Yerushalayim then?
No, they were allowed to go to Yerushalayim, to the Bezdin, this place, Beis Yazek. They would stay there. That's where their examination through the Dayanim would take place. But they would not be allowed to go any further than that courtyard. But the Chachomim, Rabbi Gamliel HaZikr, instituted the following.
So they may have gone, they may have gone much more than 2,000 amas to get to the Beth Din,
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Fine.
The question is, what happens once they've given their Bezdin?
Yeah, I understand.
Their testimony. They've had a wonderful meal, which is thrown on. Care of the Bezdin. What happens then? What do they do in the, let's say they've been there in the morning. Where can they walk to? Are they actually still confined to that place? Strictly speaking, they should be. Midrabanan. However, the Chachomim relaxed that rule, and they said, seeing as you came to do a mitzvah, we will consider the place that you came to as your actual home for Shabbos. Which means you are now allowed to go 2,000 amas from there. So you may have traveled 10,000 amas. You may have traveled, 5 kilometers more. You've got to this place, this chotzer, this Beis Yazek. Rabbi Gamliel said, we are considering, they've done it for a mitzvah purpose. We are considering it that you are home now, and therefore you will be allowed to go as anybody else is allowed to do 2,000 amas from there. Explains Tosfos. Now the rule is you allow 2,000 amas from where? Now normally you go right through, I'll say, if you've got a wall around an area, you'd be allowed 2,000 amas from there. And if there's a wall around Yerushalayim, you should be allowed 2,000 amas from there out, so once you've gone beyond that, that's your outside Yerushalayim. But we're talking here, says Tosfos, at a time when the wall was actually nifrutzu bom Yevonim, Yevonim nifrutzu alai, where the wall was actually broken, and therefore you could not consider that as an enclosure, explains Tosfos, and therefore you'd only be allowed 2,000 amos from the place, from this courtyard. Now still you've got every direction, so you go and see some of your mates living in any direction you like, but you'd only be allowed 2,000 amos. So do you see the point? That's it. Originally, you had to stay, you were confined to that courtyard, because if you've gone through a 2,000 amma barrier, you have to stay where you are. The Rabbi Gamliel said, no, we will consider these people as if that is their home, in which case they are allowed 2,000 ammas in each direction. And so you could go 2,000 ammas east, back, and then 2,000 ammas north, back. Yeah, that will be your central point. So you'd have it like a circumference, a radius going round a 2,000 ammas beyond this place, this courtyard. So you weren't actually just confined just to that courtyard. Very important principle. More about that to come. Hiskin Rabbi Gamliel Azoke, the elder. Have you got it? Rabbi Gamliel Shemahalchin Alpayim Amot L'chol Ruach, in any direction you like. You are therefore considered as if that's your home, and that's exactly that rule would apply. And that rule would apply to people who've actually, if that's their home, very important principle actually. So if, for example, you're going, let's say, in the summer, you've got a place up north in Yorkshire Dales somewhere, miles away from anywhere else. You've got your nice little place where you're staying with a family, very nice. You're there for Shabbos. You would only be allowed to walk from there 2,000 ammas each direction. So about a kilometer or so in any direction. So yeah, you might want a Shabbos afternoon walk, but watch out if you were there. Of course, if you're in a city, then you'd say it's not that whole area, that whole city. It's only out. But if you say if you're in a city, you've got 2,000 ammas from the extremities of the city. But if you are out in in Yorkshire Dales or anywhere else, or it can be somewhere nice in Switzerland, not a village on your own, then you've only be allowed 2,000 ammas from that place. And that's really what we're telling these people here. These people were considered 2,000 ammas from that place, but they're not confined just to their home. That's the point, the relaxation of Rabbi Gamliel Azokin. But notice it continues on. At the beginning of line, L'chol Ruach. V'lo elu bilvad. Not just these people. Elo af chachomo. What's this chachomo? Sounds like a wise lady. A chachoma, yes, is a wise lady. It's the lashon, the language used for a midwife. A chachoma. Yeah, this clever lady, and she knows how to help as a midwife. Av chachoma habo leyaleid. Notice the word leyaleid, not to give birth, but to help give birth. Help to deliver, yeah? So someone who's gone and they've traveled beyond 2,000 ammas, again, for Pikuach Nefesh, one's allowed to do this. So if a message got to you, for whatever, and you've got to get out there, this lady is going to help deliver the baby, Sakonos of Hoshas, she's needed, and therefore she's breaking the 2,000 amma limit, maybe. They got a message out to her, and she's going through the 2,000 amma limit. Once she gets to the place that she's helping delivering the baby, that would now be considered her home, because she's gone there to do a mitzvah, pikuach nefesh. Therefore, that's her home, and therefore she's allowed 2,000 ammas on Shabbos from that place. Might not be able to get back home if she traveled more than 2,000 amas, but she's not confined just to her house. So that's another example. Further on, v'habon lahatzil es hadleika. What's lahatzil? Person, a member of Hatzalah. They've come to help. Mipnei hadleika. There's a fire, part of Hatzalah. They come to rescue people from a fire. Umin hagayos. Gayos, the gius, which means from there's an army attacking them, and they're coming to help to enable people to leave. Then, of course, sakonos lefashos, you can travel anywhere you like. Once you've done that, and you're now out of reach, let's say, of the fire of the attacking army, you'd stop. That would now be considered your new home for Shabbos. You are not restricted just to that place and can't go any further, because the Chachamim said you've come performing a mitzvah, in this case, saving people. I say whether it's an attacking army or because helping a Hatzalah, rescuing people, or indeed, where the first example was as a midwife. Another couple of further examples. Umin hanohor. What do you mean from a nohor? From a river. Have a look at Rashi. Shehu godel, growing. Pisoim, very suddenly. V'shoitef es b'nei ha'ir. Shtifa. Yeah, not that washing, but of course it means flooding. There's a flood. B'nei ha'ir. V'es hayilodim, their children. The adults need to be saved, and you're out there helping them as a member of the Hatzalah team. Yes, you can travel any distance to be able to do that. Because nefesh, once you're now out of reach, how far can you then move? We've said now wherever you've got to, that's your new home, and therefore you're not confined just to that house. You've got your 2,000 amas, okay? And then we have a couple more. All of these are just examples. What's a mapolis? Something falling down, but it doesn't mean that. It means something collapsing. So, a building's collapsing, and you're helping people. Either way you're helping, it sounds like you've actually come to help people from all these things. So otherwise, why? Obviously, you'd be traveling out from there. Maybe you've traveled quite a distance, it doesn't matter. If you've gone through the 2,000 amas, it doesn't matter. Once you've got to wherever you've got to, you've still got your 2,000 amas, so you're not confined to that space. Hari Elu, all those people are ka'anshe ho'ir, like members of that city, although strictly speaking, as we said before, once you've gone through the 2,000 amas, you'd have to stop. No, this time we're saying because there's a mitzvah involved, you're not actually confined just to that place. Okay, that will take us to L'chol Ruach. Okay, we've got a bit of Gemara to go through, but before we do, and perhaps it must be worth me mentioning, here I am now, here we are back in Eretz Yisrael. Obviously, the big news here was last Sunday. I wasn't here in time for last Sunday, but I was here. We arrived 2 days ago, and of course, with the patira of the, unbelievable. A giant probably is not adequate to explain Reb Chaim and what he did. It was incredible. Not just the knowledge. It's not just the knowledge he had. It was how he was, and you say in Yiddish, übergegeben. Totally part of the community. He had people coming. He slept 2.5 hours a night. Besides he called it a chayv, a debt. What was the debt? The debt was that he had to finish every part of Gemara, Yerushalmi, Bavli, Midrashim, Zoya, every year. On Pesach, he made a siyum of the actual written Kol HaTorah Kula. But besides that, from 11 o'clock at night, he saw people. Sleeping only 2.5 hours a night, helping people, advising people, giving brachas to people. in every possible way. And what was amazing was that household, it was everything, the whole world was on his shoulders. Nevertheless, the household was at peace. And the smile on his face, actually used to give, joke with people too. But on top of that, so there's Bein Odom LaChaveira, Bein Odom LaMokim. Just to give you an example, I may have mentioned this once before, and this I heard from Rabbi Hartman. I don't know if people know Rabbi Hartman, who's well known from his Maharal days. He's still writing. People know Rabbi Hartman. I don't know if people heard this story. Did I ever mention this story before? It's an incredible story. He's writing his sefer on Maharal, on Chumash. But of course, a Maharal's written. This Hartman himself has written 39 different Sforim on the Maharal. Maharal writes, and it's a most incredible story. So I just tell you this just to show what we're talking about. This was about 30 years ago. He is writing a sefer on the Maharal on Chumash, and on Parshas Vayechi, amazing story. In Parshas Vayechi, the Maharal writes, why did Yaakov want to be buried in Ma'oras HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah? Because he says, the Maharal, lots of reasons are given. Rashi gives a few, but the Maharal writes because there's a medrash that says that Tchias HaMesim will start from Ma'oras HaMachpelah. And he wanted to be buried in this place where Tchias HaMesim will start. That's the Medrash. The Maharal does not write where that Medrash is. Rav Hartman is writing a Pirush on the Maharal. The first thing you've got to write, if you're writing a Pirush on the Maharal, is give the sources where the Maharal's quoting something. He can't find the source. He can't find the source. So if you look, anybody who buys this sefer or has this sefer, sees this sefer, have a look in Parshas Vayechi. I think it's note 142, as far as I remember, right at the beginning of Vayechi, when it talks about that the Maharal writes that he wanted to be buried in Ma'oras HaMachpelah because Tchias HaMesim starts there. There's a note at the bottom saying, Rav Hartman writes, sadly, I cannot. I haven't yet found the source of this most amazing medrash telling us that Tchias HaMesim. He couldn't find. Don't forget that 30 years ago, we didn't have so many available sources that we have today to be able to find these things, but he couldn't find it. Anyway, sometime later, not that much later, but sometime later, he was in Bnei Brak. And he was davening in the shul of Reb Chaim. And in those days, you could walk Reb Chaim. It's very short distance between the shul he davened and his home, very short indeed. And people walked him home and asked questions. So this amazing, he told me this himself. He's walking back with Reb Chaim. And he tells Reb Chaim, I'm writing the sefer on the Maharal, and I found this, and it mentions a medrash that Tchias HaMesim starts at Ma'oras HaMachpelah. So Reb Chaim looks quite fairly astonished, saying, interesting, with his face. But he said, no, Rebbe, where is the source? I can't find the source. Where is the source that Tchias HaMesim starts at Ma'oras HaMachpelah? And as Rav Hartman told me, he's walking with him from the shul to his home. He takes a dozen steps, stops, holds on to the arm of Rav Hartman and says, it's not in Bavli. Nit in Bavli. He's been through the whole of Shas Bavli in his mind, and it's not there. They continue walking, Rav Chaim thinking, stops after another dozen steps, turns to him, holds his arm and says, Nit in Yerushalmi. It's not in, he's been right through the whole Yerushalmi, it's not there. Walks a few more steps, stops, looks at him, not in Medrash Rabbah. Walks a few more steps, says to him, it's not in Medrash Agoda, that's like Medrash Tanchuma, there's so many other Midrashim. Walks a few more steps, turns to him and said, Nit in Zohar. It's not in the Zohar. He's been through the Zohar, right through, it's not there. After a few more steps, he says, You can learn this out, he says, from the mashmois, which means you can infer it from the words of it, what's called the Tikkunei Zoya. It's an additional sefer on the Zoya. Just to say, like, he's been through all of that in his mind 30 years ago and found it, located. It's all sitting in his mind. But on top of that, he is, as I say, Ibegegeben, you know, the brachas and the concerns he had, the calmness of his face, the really, I say, angelic is really not the word. It was incredible. And of course, this most amazing Levaya. I mean, you know, it was just packed. 900,000, 1 million people there. I know you may find some of the reporting, but I have actually spoken to people who were there, and it was the most incredible Levaya. Calmness, unbelievable. Yes, of course, there are always a couple of hotheads, but if you think, take out the number of people who were actually, the hotheads and the police getting involved in, and do a bit of mathematics and work out that compared to 900,000 people, you'd say, you work out the proportion that you're talking about there. Yet it was an incredible event. This Levaya of Reb Chaim. And people tell me, I heard directly from people who were there, children were there, the shops opened up for people passing by to come and help themselves to a drink. You know, it's all like on the house type of thing. There were people giving cakes out to people in the streets. There were people who lining the roads. Their homes were open for people to use the bathrooms when they could. It was an incredible feeling that this connection that everybody had all brought together because this wonderful Reb Chaim, who sadly we've lost. And clearly the message is that we've got to try and take that with us, this feeling that everybody had. Yes, there's a cloud here, that we've lost this incredible sage. Not, as I say, not just the knowledge, the Ben Adam Chavera, people with all problems coming to him. You know, they together pouring out their hearts, but he would be advising them and helping them in every possible way, any area. What we've got to do is try and pluck some of that and try and take that with us and keep that going in some way. And maybe these 1 million people, that's just 1 million. Amazing. What's the population? Maybe Sam, what's the population of Israel at the moment? Is it 7 million? 6? It's a seventh of the whole country at this Levaya. I mean, it's incredible. But you say that the way everybody felt towards each other, if we can take that with us, if we can try and learn that a little bit more compared to Reb Chaim, who was finishing Kol HaTorah Kula every year, maybe that should be the lesson that we should be taking with us, and that will be Le'ilu Nishmosai. And therefore, as we go, Michael El Choil, let us all, ponder on these points, and if we can be, thinking about the individuals, thinking of ourselves as we can move onwards and upwards. That will be a wonder, say, Ilu Neshama for him and for the whole of Klal Yisrael. And we should all look forward to Besuras Tevis. Going back to what we were learning today about breaking Shabbos, as we say, to save these people. That's, of course, we've seen that, we witnessed that, heard about that just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, my nephew, Jeremy Posen, who was one of the leaders there, actually my sister's son, Jeremy Posen, he was one of the people taking the orphanage out from Odessa on Shabbos. Was it 29-hour trip on Shabbos itself? But of course, that's Sakonos Nefashos. They were saved. They're now in Romania. They've certainly, Baruch Hashem, got out of Ukraine. But I'd say we've seen this today ourselves. Breaking Shabbos to be able to enable, when it comes to Sakonos Nefashos, is something we're talking about, or when there's a particular mitzvah, this mitzvah of telling when the moon has been seen, this Kiddush Levana. With that, gentlemen, I wish you well. We should all hear Besuras Tevis, one from the other. Hopefully back next week.